Have you ever gotten that feeling like something's just off?
Mm.
Like when you're talking to someone and your gut is telling you they're not being straight with you, but you can't quite figure out why.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Well, today, we're going to dive deep into the world of lie detection.
That's right.
We're talking about the science-backed techniques real experts use. Like FBI profilers, psychologists, folks like that,
Right.
to figure out if someone's being truthful or if they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about, but research shows that the average person is lied to anywhere from 10 to 200 times a day.
Wow. That's a lot alive.
I know, right? And later on, we'll even reveal a key facial microexpression that experts say is a big giveaway when someone's trying to deceive you.
I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued.
So today, we're on a mission to help you understand those subtle signals that might suggest someone isn't being completely honest. Basically, we're giving you the tools to become a human lie detector.
Well, maybe not a human lie detector, but definitely more aware of the signs of deception. I
Exactly.
think that's a great goal.
Absolutely. So where should we start with this? Maybe with the basics, like why do people lie in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. It might seem obvious, but the motivations behind lying are actually quite complex. But if we want to try and simplify it, I think a good way to look at it is to think of it as 3 Ps: protection, profit, and pleasure.
Okay, the 3 Ps of lying, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's break those down. Protection seems like a pretty straightforward one.
Right.
Like maybe lying to avoid getting into trouble.
Exactly.
Like, if you were back in school and maybe you broke a classroom rule, you might lie to the teacher to protect yourself from getting detention or something.
Exactly. Or to protect a friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Self-preservation.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Now, how about profit?
Well, I think profit's fairly straightforward too, right? We see that a lot with financial scams. Or maybe someone trying to get ahead in their career by taking credit for work that they didn't actually do. So it's about personal gain.
Right, so those are kind of deliberate lies, I guess.
Yeah, those are more calculated,
Yeah.
more cold.
Okay, now what about pleasure? That one's a little more, I don't know, abstract maybe.
Right. It's not always about tangible gain, but more about a psychological reward.
Hmm.
So, someone might lie to impress others, to make themselves look better,
Right.
or maybe to boost their ego, or sometimes even just for the thrill of the deception itself.
Interesting. So it can be tied to someone's sense of self or how they want to be perceived by others.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not always about some evil master plan.
No, not at all.
It can be about basic human needs or insecurities.
Exactly.
Now, I've heard about hot lies and cold lies before. What's the difference between those?
We'll think of hot lies as those lies that are told in the heat of the moment.
Hmm.
They're spontaneous, they're driven by emotion. So, for example, imagine someone's caught red-handed doing something wrong. They might instantly deny it without even thinking.
Yeah.
It's a reflex.
Right. Just a reaction in the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so cold lies then are more like the ones that are planned out in advance.
Yeah, they're premeditated, rehearsed, calculated.
Right.
These are the lies that take effort, like elaborate financial fraud or carefully constructed alibis.
Hmm.
So the key difference really is the level of emotional intensity and the amount of preparation involved.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we understand why people lie. We understand the types of lies. But what about those telltale signs, like we always see in movies and stuff?
Right.
Like Pinocchio's nose. Is there really a single thing that instantly exposes a liar?
Sadly, it's not that simple. There's no magic bullet, no single gesture that screams liar.
Right.
What we have to look for is a cluster of indicators, a combination of subtle cues.
Okay.
And these, when observed together, might suggest that someone's being deceptive.
Right, so it's more like piecing together a puzzle than looking for one smoking gun.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those clues. You mentioned that we've got 7 science-backed signs that we can look for. So let's start with the eyes. Isn't it true that liars avoid eye contact?
Actually, that's a common misconception.
Really?
Yeah, research suggests that liars actually tend to make more eye contact. It's like they're trying to overcompensate,
Oh, interesting.
trying to appear sincere and trustworthy.
They're trying to play against that stereotype.
Exactly, but it's not just about whether they look at you, it's how they look at you.
Right.
Like you mentioned, rapid blinking or prolonged stares, those can be pretty telling.
Yeah.
Rapid blinking can be a sign of stress or anxiety, which, makes sense if you're trying to maintain a lie. And then on the other hand, if someone's staring at you for an unnaturally long time, it can feel really forced and unnatural.
Yeah, that's true. It's like they're trying too hard
Right,
to
exactly.
hold your gaze.
Yeah, and it lacks those natural breaks and shifts that we usually see in a genuine conversation.
Right.
So it's about paying attention to the quality of the eye contact, not just the quantity.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not just about whether they look at you, it's how they look at you.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, what about micro expressions?
So microexpressions, these are fleeting facial expressions that last for just a fraction of a second, like milliseconds.
Yeah.
And they can reveal someone's true emotions even if they're trying to hide them.
Oh, interesting.
So, if someone is saying they're happy, but for a split second you see a flash of anger or fear,
Right.
that could be a sign that they're not being truthful.
So it's like their real feelings are leaking out for a brief moment.
Exactly. It's like a crack in their mask.
Yeah.
You gave the example of a smirk, which is a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe someone's pretending to be sad or sympathetic, but for a fleeting moment, a smirk flashes across their face. That could indicate a hidden sense of pleasure or even contempt.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and these microexpressions can be really hard to catch because they happen so fast.
Yeah, you'd almost have to be watching in slow motion.
Right, but with practice, you can start to pick up on them.
Okay, so we've talked about the eyes and micro expressions. Now, what about the way people talk? Can their words give them away?
Absolutely. When someone's lying, they often use language in a way that's different from how they normally speak.
Right.
For example, they might start using overly formal language, trying to create some distance between themselves and the lie. So they might avoid contractions, use more complex sentences, things like that.
Oh, so they're trying to sound more official, I guess.
Exactly, yeah, like they're reading from a script almost.
Yeah, interesting. What about filler words? Like ums and ahs?
Yeah, you'll often hear an increase in filler words when someone's lying.
Hmm.
Because their brain is working overtime to fabricate a story, they need those extra moments to think.
Right.
So they might say, a lot more than they usually would.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And what about when a story sounds a little too perfect?
Yeah, that's another red flag.
Like it's been rehearsed.
Exactly. When someone's telling the truth, their story will usually have some natural pauses. Maybe they'll stumble over a word or two. The details might not be perfectly ordered.
Right.
But when a story is too smooth, too polished, it could be a sign that it's been carefully constructed and rehearsed in advance.
Yeah, I get
I
that.
always think of that classic example. I did not have sexual relations.
Yeah.
That very formal, very specific language, it just sounds so unnatural in a casual conversation.
Right, and it totally backfired. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Now let's move on from words to body language. You mentioned touchy face earlier. What does that mean exactly?
Well, there are a couple of theories about why people touch their faces when they lie.
Okay.
One is that lying can cause a subtle increase in blood pressure and make nerve endings in the face more sensitive.
Mm.
So people might unconsciously touch their nose or rub their eyes to try and soothe that discomfort.
Oh, interesting. So it's like their body's betraying them even if they're trying to keep a straight face.
Right, exactly.
Now, the other aspect of touchy face that you mentioned was mouth covering.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
So this one's thought to be more of a symbolic gesture,
Hmm.
like a subconscious attempt to hush the lie, as if they're trying to stop those deceptive words from coming out.
Wow, like they're trying to physically block the lie?
Yeah, it's a fascinating cue.
It really is. Okay, so we've got eyes, micro expressions, verbal tics, and the touchy face. What's next on our list of potential giveaways?
Well, let's talk about inconsistent details.
Yeah.
This is a big one.
Okay.
Liars often have a hard time keeping their story straight
Right.
because they're not drawing on real memories. Their stories tend to be full of holes and contradictions.
Mm.
And there's a really clever technique called reverse storytelling that can be really helpful here.
Reverse storytelling. What's that?
Basically, you ask someone to tell their story in reverse chronological order.
Oh, interesting.
When someone's telling the truth, this isn't usually a problem because they're just recalling what actually happened.
Right.
But a liar who's invented a story,
Mm.
they'll often struggle to do this
Mm.
because they're not actually remembering events. They've created a narrative.
Right.
So they might hesitate, they might contradict themselves, they might change details. It can be a really effective way to catch them off guard.
Yeah, it's like scrambling their carefully constructed story
Exactly.
and forcing them to think on their feet.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the eyes, micro expressions, verbal cues, and even the touchy face. But what about the rest of the body?
Yeah, our bodies can often give us away even when we're trying really hard to control our faces and our words.
Hmm.
For instance, have you ever noticed someone whose feet are pointed towards the exit even while they're talking to you?
Yeah, I think I've seen that before.
Well, that could be a sign that they subconsciously want to escape the situation, especially if they're feeling uncomfortable or stressed because they're lying.
So their body's trying to make a getaway, even if their words are keeping them there.
Exactly. Yeah, and then there's crossed arms, which we often associate with defensiveness
Yeah.
or discomfort, and fidgeting hands, like tapping, ringing, or picking at their fingers.
Hmm.
Those can all be signs of anxiety or nervous energy, which again can be heightened when someone's trying to deceive you.
Right. Okay. So it's important to pay attention to the whole picture, not just the face.
Exactly. The whole body tells a story.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Now, you also mentioned too much detail as a possible sign of deception.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, sometimes when people are lying, they try to overcompensate by giving you a ton of detail.
Mm.
They think that if their story is really elaborate and detailed, it'll sound more believable.
Right. Like they're trying to bury the lie under a mountain of information.
Exactly. But what often happens is that those details end up being unnecessary or even contradictory, and it can start to feel like they're trying too hard.
Right. Like they're overselling it.
Exactly.
And that can actually make the story less believable.
Right, because it feels forced and unnatural.
Right. Okay. So we've learned about a lot of potential indicators, but are there any pro tips that we can use to really put this knowledge into practice?
Yeah, definitely. So, one really effective technique is to ask unexpected questions.
Hmm.
Like we talked about with reverse storytelling, this can throw a liar off their script.
Right.
Because they haven't prepared for these questions, they have to come up with answers on the spot.
Mm.
And that can lead to hesitation, inconsistencies, or even outright contradictions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you have an example of an unexpected question?
Yeah, sure. Imagine someone is telling you a story about being at a restaurant.
Okay.
You could ask them something like, what color was the tablecloth? Or what kind of music was playing in the background?
Mhm.
These are details that they might not have thought to invent, so if they hesitate or give a vague answer,
Right. That could be a red flag.
oh, that's a really good tip. Okay, what about silence? You mentioned using silence strategically.
Yeah, this is a powerful technique because liars often hate silence.
Hmm.
It makes them uncomfortable, so they feel the need to fill it with more information.
Right, so they keep talking even when they should probably stop.
Exactly. And this can lead them to reveal more than they intended.
Hmm.
They might offer unnecessary details. They might try to over-explain themselves. They might even contradict something they said earlier.
Right, so sometimes saying less can actually give you more information.
Exactly. Silence can be your friend in these situations.
Okay, and your final pro tip was about establishing baseline behavior.
Right.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
So this is all about understanding how someone normally acts and speaks.
Okay.
Before you can spot deviations from their normal behavior, you need to know what their normal behavior looks like.
That makes sense.
So pay attention to their usual body language, their tone of voice, their rate of speech, their facial expressions.
Right. When they're relaxed and being truthful, how do they act?
Right.
And then when you suspect they might be lying, look for any significant changes. Like if someone who's usually very animated and expressive suddenly becomes very still and quiet,
Right.
that could be a sign that something's up.
Yeah, that could be a red flag. Or if they start talking really fast when they usually speak slowly.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's about knowing the person and recognizing when something feels off for them specifically.
Right. What might be a normal behavior for one person could be a sign of deception in another.
Right, it all depends on the context and the individual.
Exactly.
Okay, this has been so insightful, but you mentioned earlier a story about a bank teller who caught a thief. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, yeah. So this was a case where a bank teller became suspicious of a customer who was making a large withdrawal.
Hmm.
And the thing that tipped her off was that the customer was being overly effusive with their thanks.
Really?
Yeah, they were thanking her profusely, multiple times, for what was really just a routine transaction. And the teller, having interacted with countless customers over the years,
Yeah.
she knew that this level of gratitude was just unusual. It felt insincere, out of place.
Interesting.
And that little detail, that over-the-top thank you,
Yeah.
it raised a red flag for her, and she decided to investigate further. And it turned out that the customer was indeed trying to withdraw funds fraudulently.
Wow, so it wasn't like a big, obvious lie or anything. It
Mm.
was just this subtle deviation from what was expected in that situation.
Exactly. And that's what I think is so fascinating about deception detection.
Yeah.
It's not always about catching someone in a blatant lie.
Right.
It's often about noticing those small inconsistencies, those subtle cues that just don't feel quite right.
Right, it's like you're tuning into a different frequency.
Exactly. You're becoming more attuned to the nuances of human behavior.
Yeah, I love that. So I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, we have.
We've gone deep into the science of lie detection.
I think so.
We've learned about the different types of lies, the motivations behind them,
Right.
and most importantly, we've explored those subtle signs that can help us spot deception.
Exactly.
So as you go about your day today, our listeners out there,
Yeah.
I want you to think about what we've talked about.
Yes.
Pay attention to the way people are looking at you, the words they're using, their body language. You might be surprised at what you notice.
That's right.
And remember, it's not about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone you meet.
All right.
It's about becoming more aware
Yeah.
of the complexities of human communication
Exactly.
and using that knowledge to better understand the people around you
Yes. And to protect yourself
and to protect yourself. Exactly.
from those who might not have your best interests at heart.
That's right. Well, this has been another fantastic deep dive.
It has been fun.
I always learn so much from you.
Oh, likewise.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and maybe, just maybe, you'll spot a liar or two out in the wild.
Happy hunting.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
See you next time.